All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Jason Phelps, Fully Alive host and coach of today's webinar. And I am here with Brian Phipps, our founder, as well as Myra Schrader, another Fully Alive host and coach. And so we are so thrilled to be here with you. Today we are talking about the July webinar. And our goal for this webinar, the next 45 minutes with you all, is going to help you receive clarity on the tactics of the thief that we read about in John 10:10, Satan himself, so that we can take our right next step to live fully alive in the freedom that comes through Jesus. So welcome, Brian, and welcome, Myra.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so we are missing our friend Craig, and he may hop in here just momentarily. But today, so we're talking about freedom through Jesus all month long. In this month of July, we're going to be talking about freedom through Jesus. And as a Fully Alive community, John 10:10 is the foundational verse that we base off our discipleship methods on. And it's the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy, but I came that you might have life and have it to the full. And so this July, that as for those of us who are in the United States, we celebrated our freedom on the Independence Day on July 4th, and so we are inviting you to consider the thief's mission, because this thief comes to steal the freedom that Jesus died for us to have. And so our first question today is, why focus on the thief? And so Brian, I'd love to hear from you. Why are we focusing on the thief as we kick off July?
Well, I mean, in one way, I guess it's kind of dumb to focus on the thief, because the hero is Jesus. Freedom is through Jesus. He's the way, the truth, and the life, and he's our path to life. So, I mean, it's usually better to focus on him. But on occasion, it's helpful to understand the one whose primary purpose in life is to keep us away from Jesus. And the beautiful thing about it is he's got some very predictable patterns and ways that he tries to steal from us. And, if there's people that try to steal from my house or try to steal from my family or whatnot, I'm going to do everything I can to stop them from doing that, so that we can enjoy the life that we have been given. And it's important to do that from a spiritual basis as well. And it's a universal problem. We all have. He's coming after all of us. And it's just really important to know those things in order to have the problems out of the way, so that the pursuit can be full.
Absolutely. Myra, what about you? Why, according to you, why would you say it's beneficial to focus on the thief and his tactics?
I would say you need to know your enemies. What's the old saying? Keep your friends close.
Keep your friends
enemies
close and your enemies closer.
Closer.
I don't know if that works.
I don't know that I want to keep him close, but I want to be aware when he is close. And I need to know when I need to go defense and when I need to go offense against him. And if I'm not aware of his tactics, if I'm not aware of his character and his methods, then I'm going to miss those things. Yeah. So I don't want to focus on him in fear, but I want to focus on him strategically. Yeah.
Absolutely. And today we're going to be focusing just in getting acquainted with the actual plan that we see Satan executing really since the beginning, right? And so a few things to consider here is that one of the things that Satan does, he deceives us into thinking that God's way is lacking, instead of living. The other thing, too, is that Satan convinces us that the world's empty promises are fulfilling. And he lures us into making choices that steal our joy and our purpose. He floods us with guilt and shame for our failure, and making us think that we're on our own and not enough. And Myra, I appreciate you bringing that to my attention yesterday, is that making us think that we're on our own, and that we're lonely, and that we're isolated. And so, with deceiving us into thinking God's way is lacking, if you have read the Fully Alive book written by Brian, talks about cisterns and from the prophet Jeremiah. Brian, you want to just kind of let us know just a little bit about these cisterns that Satan kind of lures us to when he convinces us that God's way is lacking?
Yeah, first I want to add just an additional little tidbit onto the first question that you asked, and then I'll jump right into that. Your question was, why focus on the thief? And I gave Myra and I gave just very practical answers. But the one that stood out to me is, well, Jesus could have in John 10:10 or John 10 just said, I came that you might have life and have it to the full. But instead, he does give an entire portion, half of that verse, to the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. He brings our attention to that there is an enemy one, and that he is very intentional, and his intentions are not good. Right? So it's like, if Jesus tells us, then we ought to take note of that. And so this whole idea of cisterns come clear in Jeremiah, as you say, but there's a forerunning part of this in the book of Genesis. Adam and Eve in the book of Genesis, chapter 3, they have everything in the world that they would possibly need, but Satan comes in to steal, kill, and destroy the paradise that they were in. Eden, Garden of Eden means paradise, and he did it by twisting truth. I was just in my Bible reading this morning, reading John chapter 8, where Jesus talks about how Satan is the father of lies, and all he can do is lie. And so he did it in that part in the Garden of Eden. He twisted things all around to where Adam and Eve felt as if they were missing out on the very best possible. They had the very best possible, but Satan made them feel like that paradise was lacking, because he said you could have more, was essentially what he said. And he tempted them to have what God asked them not to have. And in Jeremiah chapter 2, Jeremiah's language for that is the cisterns. And a cistern is just a way in ancient times to collect water. If you go overseas from America to other countries, there's still cisterns, but they're big plastic tubs, right? They catch rainwater and whatnot. It's a great way to have fresh water. But those things can also become contaminated as birds or animals or other contaminants from the sky get in there. And back in Jeremiah's day, they were just holes dug in the earth where they would collect water. And Jeremiah says, why in the world would you drink out of a cistern when you have natural springs of fresh, pure water? And it's those cisterns, it's that metaphor, it's that picture that Satan is regularly trying to convince us, hey, God says do it this way. Forgive your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. But he tempts us into thinking that that's a bad plan, that living is really lacking. It says what you should do is harbor that and get revenge. Well, that's a cistern. That's not God's play. And he's always trying to convince us that God's living is really lacking and that Satan's lacking is really living.
I know, we talk about how, what it means to live fully alive. And when we go back to, Genesis chapter 1, right? And where we know that we were made in God's image, that Adam and Eve, as they walked the garden, they were completely known by God, loved by God, walked with him. He knew them, they knew him, and they knew each other, right? And it wasn't until Satan came in and disrupted everything that the idea of the emotion of shame and things just went wrong. And so we were designed for that intimacy, and also in Genesis 1:28 about being fruitful and multiplying, and then filling the earth and subduing it, governing it, blessing it, taking care of it, stewarding it. And that's this idea of intimacy and influence. And when we look at the cracked cisterns, I know that I often, and I think a lot of other people, tend to settle, right? Settling for either whether it's admiration from other people instead of intimacy, or settling for approval instead of truly being known in real friendships. And I think, right, sometimes is that how Satan kind of lures us away, is that he and Myra, this goes to kind of your comment, is that he convinces us to isolate ourselves and convinces us that we forget what is true. And Brian, what you're talking about in John chapter 8, verse 31, is Jesus says, you know the truth, and the truth will set you free. It's when we forget the truth that,
and the lies will tie
right,
you up.
Absolutely, that we settle for approval and control. It's like, I'm fine as long as people love me, but if they really, really knew me, well, they wouldn't love me anymore. And I don't know that kind of talking about this, trading in intimacy, and settling for approval. How does that? Where have you guys seen that show up in your own lives, or any other meaningful stories? Because I know that it shows up for me is that sometimes I feel like, Satan kind of gets in my head that, like, Jason, if they really knew you, that they wouldn't want you around, and that's a lie, and that's one of the things that inhibits the fully alive life, and that Jesus reminds us. And I love this quote. It came from Craig Rochelle from Life Church, that says, "When you know who you are, you know what to do." And I think it's when we forget who we are, that's when we find ourselves settling for those cracked cisterns, and we step into that way that we think that God's way is really lacking when it's not. Myra, you were going to say something. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
I was just thinking that in terms of the critical importance of that known identity, that God made you who you are, and that He made you in His image, for His purposes. And if I'm good enough, if that's satisfactory to Him, if that's what He wants, how can anyone else say that I should be more than that? It just comes back to me again and again. One of the things when I first became involved with Disciples Made and the Fully Alive community, one of the things that I would talk about with people a lot was more, that I wanted more, but the more that I was talking about was Jesus. And it just occurred to me, listening to Brian talk about this today, that Satan twists that more, that we were created to want more of Jesus, more with God, that fully alive life, and he twists it to say, no, there's more. God's holding out on you. That's not enough. You deserve so much more. You deserve the things of this world that the world can give.
And that's marketing 101 too. So it's
absolutely.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Appeal to the cell.
And so, when we talk about fully alive, we talk about thriving in intimacy and influence. And influence is the other thing too, right? Is that these cracked cisterns that we settle for instead of influence, is that we try to control. We try to control the outcomes. And I know that in my life, when I look at it, is that approval and control have a unique relationship between them, and that sometimes that I actually will leverage my control to gain approval. And I don't know if you guys have seen that, right? Is that if I feel like I need to if I feel like my approval level is going down, then I'll use my influence, right, to try and control situations and scenarios, or even control how people see me and what I present. And so it's almost like this vicious cycle that Satan can use to play, what Jesus gave us of this intimacy and influence, and that he convinces us to use it against ourselves, and we get caught up in this rat race of just seeking approval and control day in and day out. And to make sure that that we can convince the world that we're lovable and valuable, which eventually kind of leads to some sort of breakdown where we throw up our hands and we're like, I can't do it anymore. So Jesus, help me. And I think Brian, you had said it earlier about playing offense rather than just defense. Because I think sometimes is that a lot of followers of Jesus is that we get used to playing defense. Is that we're living our life, we're doing the best we can, and then all of a sudden we get hit and we come crashing down, and then we repent and turn and we say, Jesus, I'm sorry, forgive me, and then we just go back about our own life. And it's just like this defensive game gets exhausting, because I know that there's a period of my life where most of my prayers were, Jesus, I'm sorry, forgive me. and that's not that's an exhausting place to be, And so rather than being offensive. And so when we know how Satan operates, is that we're able to be on the offensive. And I think that, when we continue to get this taste of this fully alive life that Jesus gives us, it's worth the spiritual habits and disciplines that it takes to stay close to Jesus. I want to go ahead and just kind of also give a glimpse of just coming off of last month's webinar with a reminder of Jesus's fully alive plan, right? Because we don't just want to talk about the tactics of Satan, but we do want to talk about this we want to paint this picture of the life that Jesus offers us, and that he justifies us from our sins, past, present, and future, right? And he sends us his Spirit to help us see the value and to prioritize God's ways, changing us from the inside out with the fruit of the Spirit, and lead us into our masterpiece mission to make the world more like heaven. And then clinging on to this promise that he is always with us, within us, and which is more than enough. And so I want to go ahead and just talk about how what this life of freedom. So in John 8:31, that we know the truth, and the truth will set us free. Brian, you just want to talk a little bit about this freedom that awaits, and versus how Satan tries to convince us that God's way is lacking.
I think when it comes to freedom, this really gets back to the very core of the conversation. What is Jesus making us free to do? What does the truth give us? What freedom does the truth give us access to? When he says that he is the way and the truth and the life, what is that, and what is the freedom on the backside? And the most simple answer is we have the freedom to live the way we were created to live. And that is a pregnant statement as I hear it kind of just coming into my headphones here. We are given the freedom to live the way we were created to live. Well, that means that apparently if the thief is being effective or has been effective, then we don't have the freedom to live the way we were created to live. And it begs the question, how then were we created to live? And we've used the words a lot. We were created to live the way we were created to live, and we were created in God's image. And what does that mean? Doesn't mean we look like him, because he doesn't have a face. I mean, he got a face when Jesus came to earth, to live out his mission. But my face doesn't look like Jesus' face. I don't even know what Jesus' face looks like. Myra's face doesn't look like Jesus' face. Jason, perhaps yours does, the nice beard and all that other stuff. What does it mean to be made in God's image? Well, the best understanding I have of this is that we are like him in two primary ways. We're relational beings. God is a relational being. There's the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Elohim in Genesis is the Hebrew word that describes God, or is the name of God, and that is a plural word. He's relational. We're wired for relationships, which is why we say we're designed for intimacy. Right? And Jason, you pointed this out really well earlier on the call, is that we long for intimacy, but we tend to have a hard time truly finding it because it's threatening. There's shame in our lives that makes us like opposite, or like the same ends of a magnet. It's just hard to get close. You relationally, you try, and then your feelings get hurt, and you do things you shouldn't do, blah, 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 blah. Go to the control and all that. We're part of our image of God is that we are relational, and we yearn for, live for, created for intimacy. And the other one is influence. God's a creative God. He's a God that brings order. He preserves. He keeps. And to us, he gave the job in Genesis to be fruitful and multiply. There's the intimacy part. But to have dominion, to be his ambassadors down here, we're created for influence. And I think that's why we long to answer two questions. Am I lovable? That's the intimacy. And will my life matter? The questions of legacy and things like that. So to go back to your question, I now have the freedom to truly experience the deep well springs of powerful intimacy, close, mutually beneficial relationships. I have the ability, in a selfless way, partner with Jesus and his Spirit to bring heaven to earth. not in a way that brings me glory, but in a way that brings him glory. I'm free to do that. And there's a million things that get in the way that just kind of lock my hands and not do that. I have to work 85 hours a week because I feel like I have to have $400,000 a year to fix my relationships with my kids, to get them things, since I can't actually be home. Like, just think of all the ways that we get bound up and can't really tap into those true well springs of life. Those are all cisterns. They're not necessarily cisterns, but they are often cisterns that keep us away from the real deal.
Yeah.
So sorry for the long answer.
Great. That's great. Myra, do you have anything to add to that? Because I got a question, but I want to make sure that I keep everything kind of rounded out.
Just a thought as Brian was talking. One of the things that really impacted my life as my kids were growing up was that whole idea, that search for approval that came through, that I saw coming through my kids. So I tried to control those relationships. I tried to control things with my kids. I tried to control how they appeared to other people. And it so damaged the relationships along the way. And so that, that struggle for approval just really is such a real thing and such a real cistern that ruins and destroys lives. Jesus redeems those things. I am a testament to that. But it's it's so critical, and the freedom that I thought I would have to serve him, the respect that I thought I would have that I needed to get through controlling other people was just gone. It worked in just the opposite way. And so that is so much the way those cisterns work.
Yeah. You brought up, I think, a key word, that word threat. And I think that, for men and women, being wired just a little bit differently, control and approval show up in a little bit different ways. Can you talk more about, just from your perspective, when you use that word threat? Unpack that a little bit.
I don't even remember using the word. So
okay, well, no, no, that's fine. I'll help you, because I think you said you had said that perhaps the reason that we feel the need to control is because we sense some type of threat to perhaps our security, our safety, our identity, and so out of perhaps fear or anxiety or some external threat, as a mom, as a wife, etc., is that we then we grab on and we have all the answers or whatever that is. So I don't know, maybe that helped just a little bit.
Yeah. And I think so to me, the threat is that I would not be lovable, that I would not have the approval of others, that I would not have their respect, to have them look at me and say, oh, she's a good mom, she's a good woman, she's someone that I want to follow her example in ministry, but also with my family. So the threat there is to not look as good as I want to look, right? And that just is so damaging. And instead of reacting from love and trust and just an attitude of peace that God can provide, instead I grab onto the lies and fears of Satan and listen to those things and let him twist. And he takes anytime I feel fear or shame or threat, I've got to look at where it's coming from, and the source is usually not God, it's Satan. So when I think about the freedom that we're talking about this month, that's the freedom that I have found in Jesus, and that's the freedom of the fully alive life. I don't need to be afraid. I don't need to worry about the threats. I don't need to be ashamed because I can take it all to Jesus.
I love that. And there's a lot of voices in our lives. There are so many voices. And, it makes me think, in John 10:10, right, is that, in that scripture is that, the thief is speaking through the Pharisees, right? And so I think that also is that we have brothers and sisters in church, other Christians who are well-intentioned and well-meaning, but their words can also steal life from us. And the reason I'm kind of bringing this up is I know for my wife, being a young mom in her mid-30s, is that everybody has an opinion on how you should parent your kids. And so when we're talking about shame and all of these other emotions that come with, because everybody has, just that opinion on this is how you should parent. This is what you should do. This is what you shouldn't do. Ooh, if you were a great mom, you shouldn't do that with your kids. And it's like all of a sudden, it's like you're getting absolutely overwhelmed and questioning yourself, and you have this need to prove yourself. And I think that is a key thing as well, and a key tactic of Satan is that he convinces us that we need to prove ourselves. He convinces us that we need to prove that that we deserve a seat at the table, that we need to prove our existence, that we need to prove we're a good mom, prove we're a responsible father. Everything is tied up in proving, and I think that is another tactic that the thief uses to steal this fully alive life away, is that we have to prove ourselves. And I know in our Disciples Made cohorts is that when we that some of the content is we talk about the gospel, and the 4 G's is a part of that, and that it's like and it comes from Tim Chester's book You Can Change, is that like God is good and gracious and great and glorious, so we don't need to prove ourselves. We don't need to fear others. We only need to look to Jesus, for he alone satisfies. And then he's gracious with us. And so I think sometimes that the thief uses others to convince us that we need to prove ourselves. And I think that's what I alluded to earlier. It is definitely wrapped up in having to prove myself. So
I agree. Yeah, the other thing is, it doesn't even have to be the real thoughts of others. Satan will twist our thoughts so that we assume this is what people are thinking about me. It can be one little look that means absolutely nothing or is directed towards something else, but I'll take it and go, oh, they didn't like what I said.
Right. Absolutely.
Silly,
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that reminds me is that the more time that I just simply spend with Jesus, his voice becomes louder and louder. And I think that's, when we talk about all the voices, right, is whose voice is the loudest.
Yeah, you mentioned accountability as well. And if I have those 2 or 3 accountability people close to me, when I start having those doubts, when I think, I'm feeling that somebody's judging this way or that way, I can go to those folks and say, tell me about, am I imagining it? Am I letting Satan get into my head? Or am I doing something that I need to change?
Yeah, that's great. I remember when I was a senior in high school, and I was on a youth trip, and I had my youth director there with me, and we were talking about this idea of freedom. And I remember asking him as a 17-year-old, if we have freedom in Christ and the truth sets us free, doesn't that mean we should be able to do anything and everything we want, right? And I couldn't really quite grasp how freedom meant something different at that point in time. But Brian, you had said a little bit ago that we are free to love. We are free to serve. We are free to live lives of significance. which doesn't, I mean, I guess we are free, right, to drink from the cisterns, but we are implored not to use our freedom to satisfy the sinful natures. Brian, you want to talk a little bit more about just like that freedom that we are free to live into this fully alive life? I'd love for you just to kind of continue painting us a picture of what that looks like, building off of intimacy and influence.
Yeah, I mean, it starts with really putting a nail in the coffin of what you said about the erroneous interpretation of I'm free to do whatever I want. I mean, I'm free to hit myself in the head with an anvil. It's just, all things are permissible, but not all things are beneficial. And, Paul in Romans 6 comes just down, should we go on sinning so that grace might increase? I mean, his answer is, well, don't be stupid. I mean, it's a very strong no, dummy. So I hope that you don't fall into that trick, because that would be Satan again trying to distort something that's true, by bending it. There is no freedom like that. I early on in my pursuit of Jesus, right before, I was a churchgoer. I was raised in a pastor's home, etc. Mom was the Sunday school teacher. I mean, I was surrounded by mom and dad at church, so I had to be there. And I was making an absolute mess of my life from like 15 through 19. And everything I tried to do just got me into more and more trouble, because I was being driven by the yearnings of intimacy and influence, but satisfying them with cisterns. And we've given language to that: approval, control, sensuality, all the other things that replace true intimacy and influence. And those were just getting me deeper and deeper into a hole. And I was like Paul says at the end of Romans chapter 7, who will rescue me from this body of death? And of course the answer is thanks be to Jesus Christ, his son. And so when I talk about, having the freedom to live, I am no longer a slave to stupid. I mean, the Bible's word there is slave to sin, but that's just truly an admission that on my own, I don't have the proper equipment or motivations to make decisions that lead to intimacy and influence. I make decisions that lead to me, by default. That's just the way we all are. And if you're not that way, write the book and I'll buy it, because I need to learn to live. But how do we move forward then? And the beautiful thing is we have a hero, Jesus, who came and lived that life for us. He modeled it for us. This is what it looks like. You want to truly serve others? Be last. You want to be the greatest? Be last. And he modeled that. I'll die on the cross. I'm God, but I'll die on the cross. I'm sinless. I don't deserve this, but I'll do it because I love you. I lay down my life for you. And so, I mean, he got the greatest amount of influence by offering the most amount of service. And we get to do that too. We get to partner with Jesus. And he's given us spiritual gifts through his spirit. He's given us unique passions through our story. And as we use those gifts to serve him and to serve others, not for ourselves, we experience true influence in the world. Like, I'm doing one of the things I love to do most right now, explain God's word in a way that helps people get it and engage it. And that's a gift that God's given me, and it's a passion he's given me, and I just love doing it. And that's my way of helping make earth more like heaven, is for people to be able to see that way and walk in it. But when it comes to relationships, he also sends the Spirit of God to develop fruit in my life, to turn my anxiety to peace, to turn my sadness to joy, to turn my love and division, or my hate and division into love. Like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Those are the things he helps me become that build my relationships. So I'm free not only from the restraints of sin, but I'm free to access the beautiful gift of the Spirit of God, who Jesus has sent, and partner with him in becoming much, much more. That's the more Myra was talking about earlier. Much, much more than I am without it.
Yeah. Galatians 2:20. All right. For I am crucified with Christ, and it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And my goodness, like that's when you talk about like letting go of our pride, letting go of our frustrations and hate, and these cisterns, is recognizing that, kind of what you already said, that Jesus calls us to live a life of humility and to laying our life down and to love our enemies, and and then serving one another. And I think that when I think of Jesus's words, and I've been seeing this kind of around social media and stuff recently, is just a lot of conversations about lording over people, right? And not to be like the Gentiles. And I think what that kind of flows into, another kind of tactic of Satan, another lie, is that if somehow if we don't control the situations, or if we give in to intimacy, we lose our influence. And I think there's kind of a dichotomy there, that we have a fear of intimacy to maintain influence. Does that make sense? That if go ahead, Myra.
I am a person with trust issues from way back. Things that happened and things that I participated in. And when I think about that, those trust issues and how that robs me, and avoiding intimacy because of that, how that has, seeing over time, and as I've matured a little bit, seeing how that robs me of the kind of influence that God really wants me to have. They're so tied. I mean, if you have trust issues like me, you're going to trade away a lot of that God-given influence in order to protect yourself.
Mm-hmm. That's well said.
It's a lifelong lesson, in my case.
Right. I think it's that if I can just keep you an arm's distance away, not let you get in too much,
mm-hmm.
all will be fine. And once again, that's
right.
It is. And I think that this is, when it comes to being a spiritual influencer, is that feeling like somebody's got to start this. So if you're in like a friend group or in a church or somewhere, like it, or getting a few friends together to say, hey, can we create a safe place where we can thrive in intimacy and influence? Because if you're the first one, let's just say, who says, all right, well, I'm gonna be myself, and I'm gonna open up, I'm gonna be vulnerable, I'm gonna kind of show my flank a little bit, and to risk getting hurt. And then also, is like, that's a huge risk. And I think it's a real thing that perhaps for somebody listening to our conversation and stuff today, is that it is a real risk. And, and so I think that if we can, if we have a mentor or peers alongside of us or other things that can help us to kind of say, hey, let's create a culture here where we can show up as ourselves and where we can experience love and all this kind of stuff. And so, because I think there's a lot of fear of being wounded, where we hold people at a distance because of fear. And and so I think when we think of kind of what we do as disciples made, is is that in the environments that we create of being habit fueled and outcome focused and content flavored and community forged and mission fixated, is that it is all in pursuit of this fully alive life, to take on the offensive against the thief, as a people, as a community, within marriages, within my family, and all this kind of stuff. Is so, can we create environments where people can thrive in intimacy and influence? And so, Brian, I'd love to hear just kind of, for people that are in the Fully Alive community, or those who have yet to join it, is that what can people expect to find in the Fully Alive community to help us take on that offensive and to thrive in intimacy and influence?
Yeah, there's an awful lot to the Fully Alive community, but if you were to look for a table of contents in it, There are things that help folks that are exploring who Jesus is. There are courses, of course, and there's courses to help people really develop, develop their character and calling, which develop intimacy and influence in our relationships. But then there's the influence level. And it's at the influence level that we've got these much longer exclusive invitation cohorts that can last anywhere from 4 to 9 months, that create these environments you're talking about, that establish vulnerability, that have rules about privacy and confidentiality. It's like most folks don't have that structure. Most people have I've got to protect myself, put the walls up, execute, watch out for number one and trust no one and all these other things. And so we are kind of indoctrinated and build our lives with those kind of structures that hurt us. And so what we've done is, through followers made, leaders made, missionaries made, kingdom influencers, every one of these 4 influence level cohorts have the big group of 12, but the subgroups inside of that group of 12 of 3 that we call triads. And it's there that you're doing your Bible engagement, your I believe and I wills, and it starts wisely, not quite vulnerable, because you don't know the people yet necessarily. You may, but if you don't, you just take your time and you're coached. There's a coach leading the cohort that's been there and done that and knows a lot of the godly wisdom of being a disciple of Jesus. And you get and you over the period of time, that longer period of time, develop trust as you become more and more vulnerable in those triads. And so you learn through this practicum type of experience how to have those kind of environments set up in your own life apart from Followers Made. So like the goal of the last 10 weeks of the 26 weeks of Followers Made is, okay, who will your triad be once this cohort is over? So you're basically reorienting your life, and part of that is how to have those vulnerable relationships, because if they can happen there, they can start to happen in other places, work and home and everything else. So I'm glad you went there, because it's one thing to tell people how to structure their life to experience the freedom that we're talking about. It's another to say there's an opportunity for you to join. And if you want to go look in the community, all you do is click that navigation bar and go all the way down to how do I engage in an influence level cohort. And I would start with Followers Made, and I would take the little information huddle. There's a book to read and there's some video to watch, and then you can fill out an application. And it's free. We have coaches that are trained and ready to invite you into these cohorts as you're ready. And they're life-changing. Absolutely life-changing.
I love it. One thing came to my mind is that really vulnerability breeds vulnerability. Right. And so I think that for anybody that is leading and wants to see change, is that for me, I know that that whether it's somebody that I supervise at work or even with my kids or my wife or my friends, is that when I show vulnerability, it creates a safe space, and it's really contagious. Yeah. And so in whatever context that any of us are in, is that if we can find all of our needs and protection in Jesus, so that we no longer need to prove ourselves, we no longer need to fear, because we know that we are safe and secure and held within the arms of Jesus, we can do anything. And so nothing to prove, no one to fear, is that now we can take steps of vulnerability that create other environments for people to experience the same, which then is wrapped up in loving kindness and a whole lot of joy. And it's amazing how we can step into this fully alive life together and thrive and in its intimacy and influence. And so before we kind of close out today, Brian, Myra, is there any kind of last words that you'd love to be able to share with people that are how they can be on the offensive against the thief, or, and just kind of embracing the life of freedom that we have in Jesus?
Got something, but I see Myra stewing on something. I want to let her voice speak before mine.
Go for it. I haven't. The thoughts haven't formed into words yet.
Gotcha. There's a lot we could talk about here. Like I said at the beginning, this is a universal problem. The thief's after all of us. Particularly if you want to step into a cohort like we just described, followers made or whatnot, or if you get really intentional about pursuing this freedom, that's kind of when you're the whack-a-mole. You're the part that pops up, and Satan really has a particular interest in you. I know when Carol and I planted a church, Carol's my wife, a number of years ago, we had the most obvious attacks against our family that we'd ever seen. So I think one thing that makes sense to me is Satan, he has a trifold effort to mess us up. Some of us, like, this is a little bit of psychology, but there's kind of three main ways we as humans operate or engage the world. We think, we feel, and we do. It's cognitive thinking, emotional, our feelings, and then our volitional or our will, the things that we do. And Satan comes after all of them. And it's just helpful if you haven't caught it throughout the course of this conversation yet. He wants to come at your head. He wants to make you think things are true that aren't true, right? And it's not just that, but it starts there. That's the way it started with Adam and Eve. That's the way he tried to do it with Jesus when he tempted Jesus in the desert. He tried to get Jesus to think things that weren't exactly right. And that's why Jesus kind of responded with Scripture, which was right. And that's how he overcame the second one. The next thing Satan wants you to do, or to impact, is your choices. He wants you to think lies so that you do things that are more cistern-like than the pursuit of character and calling, or the fruit of the Spirit, or the gifts of the Spirit. Selfish instead of selfless. He wants you to think the wrong thing so that you do the wrong thing, so that you feel condemnation and shame and embarrassment. Think about that. He's going after all three parts of who you are. And every one of them is so that you end up feeling horrible. And it's usually when we feel horrible that we tend to give up. So he does want to deflate us. And all we're talking about so far is how he comes at an individual. How does he come at a family? Right. Or how does he come at another type of unit, like a team or a workplace? And he comes in and he tries to divide people through these problems, right? Create division and distraction and distortion. And he's all about destruction. And if you're tired of being a part of his wake of destruction, you have a community that is ready to equip you and to support you and love you and encourage you, meet you right where you are, and help you move forward. Then help you help others move forward as well. So just recognize the comprehensive nature of his destructive efforts, and then team up with like-minded people who want to overcome.
Beautifully said.
Sorry.
So for all of those listening today, a couple questions for you is, where's the thief holding you captive right now? Take some time and reflect on that. And then how will you seek Jesus' freedom this month? We'd love to have you on the Fully Alive community, on the Fully Alive app, and we encourage you to engage with the questions. And there's a number of people in there ready to encourage you, to love on you, speak some truth, and that we're all in this together. So where's the thief holding you captive? And how will you seek Jesus' freedom this month? And so we got a next step for you. You can join Live Fully Alive, which is starting September 9th. That will be held at 7:30 p.m. And you can register for that on the Fully Alive app. The beauty is that you can Central Time. That's right. And so the beauty too is that any of the courses in Explore or Develop level, you can lead them on your own. Grab a few friends, grab your husband, grab your wife. It'd be a beautiful thing. And also, we would love to have you welcome people into the Live Fully Alive community as well. And so if you want to become an advocate for the Fully Alive community, please reach out to us. And so once again, thank you so much. And keep an eye out for all of the content around the Fully Alive app, as well as Fully Alive on Instagram and Facebook on this topic of freedom through Jesus. And so thanks again for coming with us today. And Myra and Brian, thank you so much for joining me as we talk about our July theme.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. Thanks, Myra.
Thanks, Brian.